Bruce DuMont back for hour number 2 of Beyond the Beltway. Thank you very much for joining us. We have 3 new guests to share their thoughts and opinions. Mays Jackson joins us. He is a veteran broadcaster from Chicago. He's got his own internet radio and TV show going on, and we'll hear from Mays in a moment. David Kohn is a moderate Republican, I'd say a never-Trumper. He spent many years with in the civic world with the Civic Club, and also the Urban Club, rather. And also, Brent Hamachek joins us. He is with Human Events, one of the legendary periodicals in conservative politics, and also a big Trump supporter. So we thank you all. I want to begin by picking up a little bit on what we did in the last hour, but I want to change it a little bit, and I want to talk to you, David, and get your sense as to whether or not the transition insofar as the average person on the street, is it going okay for them as long as the vaccine is working its way to public distribution? Is that the main thing that the average person really cares about right now, or is it the issue of the veracity of the election?
I really do think, Bruce, that the vast majority of Americans, no matter what their political leanings are, have basically had it up to here and beyond with the political process leading up to the election. And now the vast majority of Americans understand what the results of the election are, and they're waiting for the transition to occur. I don't think they're paying as much attention to it as political junkies like us. If I can assume that inclusivity. I think people, if you ask 9 out of 10 people on the street, are you concerned about the integrity of the election that we just had? Do you think that the election was fair and conducted correctly? Most people would say yes, unless they happen to be among those majority of Republicans who, for some reason, for reasons which I can't comprehend, think that there's something amiss about the elections that we just went through.
Mays Jackson, what are the African Americans that you know and deal with on a daily basis, as well as the broader community of your friendship? What are they saying about what's going on now? Are they worried about the fraud, or are they more interested in getting on with their day and worrying about their COVID test?
I do not think that anyone is really worried about the fraud. I think in my community, plenty of people are rejoicing that Donald Trump is gone. However, I think the prevailing conversation now in the Black community is what's next. We believe that we delivered this election to Joe Biden, and yet we do not see that reflected in his cabinet choices or what he says he's planning on doing in the first 100 days. And so I think there's a heavy level of skepticism. And then when it comes to the COVID-19 20 and 21, as I like to call it, there is the concern about the vaccine, not so much that it's going to be, but can we really trust that vaccine? There's a tremendous amount of trepidation in our community with the concept of this vaccine and it being put out so fast, especially with our not so far distant memory of things that happened like the Tuskegee experiment.
Okay, I want to follow up on a couple of those points as the program unfolds. But Brent Hamachek, thanks very much, Brent. You're the official card-carrying Republican, at least the Trump card-carrying Republican.
Trump, right? Trump supporter, yes.
Yeah. Your reaction to the reaction of many of his followers.
Well, a few different things. First of all, I think that I'm getting sort of numb with the mainstream media as a rehearsed talking point in every interview and every newscast, saying baseless claims of election fraud, despite no evidence. These are words they use now reflexively to lead into whatever the topic happens to be. The truth of the matter is, there is a tremendous amount of actual evidence of election fraud. There's 4 criteria of evidence in a criminal proceeding. We've got all types represented. So there's lots of evidence. I don't think it's going to overturn the election.
Has any judge confirmed that to a level of satisfaction to you?
I wouldn't. The question is asked. I wouldn't answer. It's not about a level of satisfaction to me. We have court cases still moving through the process, so that's clearly an indication that there is some merit. But it's not the point, because the point is that despite the fact that there is objectively, it is a factual statement, there is evidence of election fraud. It's not likely going to do anything to reverse the election, from the simple point of view that there's just not enough time. The complexity of the legal cases that will have to be brought over time simply can't be put together in this short a period. So America is looking squarely at a Joe Biden presidency, a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris presidency, and they are looking squarely at the next 4 years under an administration that is going to embrace the form of socialism that weds big business and big government together for the purpose of national planning. And most of the people that voted for Joe Biden don't actually know that, because most voters
stand by for a second, Brent. I want to go back to David Kohn, because David is there, and I want to underscore you're a never Trumper. You'd like him to go away. We'll talk about whether he will or not. Not likely, at least based on the conversation in hour number one. But does Donald Trump have an issue that he can rightfully ride to perhaps a rerun in 2024 that is based on voter fraud and intimidation, things that Republicans have talked about for many years, since 1960, since John Kennedy's narrow victory over Richard Nixon? That has been part of a Republican mantra. It's never been raised to the level that it is now, either during the campaign or certainly post-campaign. Does that issue deserve the type of follow-through? Even though Donald Trump is not going to be president, could he be making a valuable contribution to the future of elections in this country by pushing this to more effective legislation throughout the 50 states?
Well, he could do that, but that's not his intent or his objective. His objective is to try and cast doubt, with all due respect to my friend Brent, so-called evidence that courts across the nation have rejected, including Trump-appointed senior federal judges, laughing these cases out of court. The Republican Party, among other things, used to stand for the rule of law, and it used to stand for due process. And here you have the president's not making an argument that there are areas of our election machinery that need to be addressed and corrected, and that where fraud could occur. He's not making a subtle argument. He's making a blanket statement. This was rigged. I was robbed. You were robbed. You are victims. This is destructive of the democratic process. It is destructive of the republic that the Republican Party once stood to defend. It is absolutely shameful. It's shameful. There is no legal path.
We've got to pause. I'm Bruce DuMont. Don't go away. We'll hear more from everybody in a moment. Bruce DuMont back. We continue with Beyond the Beltway from Chicago and all points east and west and north and south. And just a quick point, last week on this program, I mentioned that I had the COVID-19 and I was in quarantine, which is why we did the program. We did it last week, and we're doing it again this week. Not so much because of COVID, just because of the convenience that it provides. But I do want to mention that I got the antibody test. It was positive. So the antibody is hopefully protecting me from the future, and I've got the green light to go, and I'm out of quarantine, and I'm back, and I feel good. I haven't actually really felt very bad on this whole last couple of weeks, but again, that's my COVID-19 report. I'm alive and well and enjoying my conversation with our guest this evening.
Bruce,
Mays, I want to go back to
at the
yes. Go ahead,
appropriate
Dave.
time, are you considering perhaps donating plasma since you have the antibodies now?
No one's asked that. I will think about that. That I've done that in the past, and I may do it in the future. But thank you for asking. Maybe I'll do it live on the air. I'll give my blood. I'll give my blood live on the air. Mays Jackson, I want to go back to you because one of the concerns that certainly has been discussed at the national level is in the early days of the COVID pandemic or plague. It became apparent that African Americans were behind the eight ball on some of their protections, some of the whole process. The percentage of African Americans getting COVID-19 was higher than usual, and what followed is a discussion that you referenced, is that many in the African American community are not really wild or excited about this vaccine. Some of them may vehemently oppose it. So I'm wondering if you can give us a little more history, because I'm sure there's lots of people listening to the program this evening that would say, if there's a limited amount of vaccine that's available, why are we trying to force it on people that really don't want it? Reaction.
So I have a couple points there, and thank you, Bruce. First, let's start with the response when we found out that Black people were dying at a disproportionate rate. There was no immediate action. There was no emergency action taken by the federal government or the state government, as a matter of fact, to address the death, except to say we would get more testing. So I think in our community, there's a concern that you watched us die at alarming rates when it happened. And now that there's this vaccine that's gone through this rapid testing or gone through this rapid approval process, should we really trust it? And the thing that I think people don't recognize is that there's been a history in this country of people. I don't like to use people of color, but it's gone back to the Indians when they were given the blankets with smallpox, to the Tuskegee experiment, where Black men were told that they were giving a cure, but they were being injected with syphilis to be experimented on. I think that resonates back in the back of minds of Black people. And then when we think about the response to the HIV and AIDS crisis and how it disproportionately impacted the Black community, we never saw the government rushing to push it to our neighborhoods. And I would say that people who are saying that, why are we rushing to give it to our community? I don't know if that's a big fight right now, because I will tell you that on my morning show, nobody that I know except for first responders say that they plan to get that drug until they see how it affects other people. And I don't think that anyone should be forced to have to do it.
Let's go to Brent Hamachek. Brent, how do you feel about the way in which it has been announced that this vaccine is going to be distributed? Do you have any problem with the current plan?
Well, I think it's interesting. Look, I think it's interesting that the CDC recommends that first healthcare workers get it, which seems to make some good, perfect sense. That seems reasonable. And next, we're going to give it to really old people. Now, I'm puzzled. So we have these kinds of decisions being offered by a group of people who, in general, represented by Mr. Emanuel so well, who talks about how meaningful life ends at the age of 75. Bruce, you're proving that wrong. But we're going to give it to the elderly instead of to the people who should be willing, able, comfortable to get back to work, to be able to get things produced for the country, to get the country going again. We have a way to protect the elderly if they are, I mean, you just went through it and here you are. I know some elderly people who've had it, including a lady who's 96 years old and wasn't even treated, and she's just fine. But regardless, the anecdotal stories don't matter. It does not seem to me to make a lot of sense that we would take a class of people who could be protected if they choose to be, simply by being able to be isolated a bit and not focus first on the people that need to put America back to work again. So not my decision to make, but it's a bit puzzling to me.
I want to go to David Kohn. Dave, how do you weigh in on this? Is this the right priority that you have heard and read about from the federal government at the moment?
Well, let me, just by way of background and to lay all my cards on the table, I worked for a member of Congress who oversaw funding for the NIH and HHS and CDC and the scientific institutions that we're turning to for guidance and for assistance during this crisis. I have great faith in science. I don't think that scientists are perfect, but I think that their judgment, particularly when it comes to epidemiology, and I had the great privilege of actually interacting with Dr. Fauci, these people understand the way that disease transmission occurs and they've studied it, and we ought to be listening to their guidance. In terms of the exact mitigation strategies, I think that the inoculation schedule should proceed in a logical way. And we cannot, I don't think one of the conversations I think we have to have is we obviously want to protect vulnerable populations and first responders and obvious groups of people. But, I don't think we should get into a sort of an economics versus the value of human life type discussion because,
But hasn't that decision, Dave, hasn't that already been made? Because when you're basically saying we're going to go first of all to everyone who works in a nursing home, I don't object to that at all. That sounds smart to me. But I'm concerned about the second piece. I'm not so sure that the second priority should be men and women of my generation who happen to be in nursing homes. Because in many cases, they are being treated, they can be treated, and in many cases, they are most susceptible. I understand that. But there might be a 45-year-old restaurant worker who has a family, or a bus driver, or someone who isn't considered, maybe an essential worker, or certainly a first responder. And frankly, they need this vaccine, and they may need this vaccine more than someone who's 89 years old and is been in a nursing home for 10 years.
Sure.
Does anybody? And by the way, this is a horrible thing to say because you are picking one over the other. And what I'm just saying is that by coming up with this policy, I mean, there is a little politics in all of these discussions. Mace Jackson.
Bruce, I think the other thing, and I'm going to push back just a little bit on David. I think that right now we're practicing, when you tell us to trust these epidemiologists and trust these doctors and scientists, I think they're practicing what one of my co-hosts, Ruthie Moore, calls kind of science. When they're telling us that it's the worst time ever and that we're going to lose lives, but we're being pushed back into going back to schools. When we see that they're trying to save restaurants and trying to save businesses, there seems to be some incongruency between the messaging of trying to save the economy. We've got the mayor pointing our finger, telling us to stay home, at the same time telling us to come out and go shopping. And so I think there's a lot of mixed messaging. And when you think about the convolution of all of that, people are starting to be confused and say, who really is telling me the truth? Who do I trust? First they told us to go to Chinatown because it was safe, and then they told us not to go. So I just think that there's a lot that goes into that.
I don't disagree with anything you just said, except that you're mixing in a lot of different issues there that I don't think belong in the same discussion. There's a big difference between restrictions that could be imposed by a mayor or a state legislature or a governor using executive authority versus a CDC guidance on how we're going to roll out a vaccine nationally. The CDC isn't making decisions about economic activity. They're issuing guidelines. We're talking here about issuing guidelines for how a vaccine is going to be distributed. But I agree with you. There has been confusion. And one of the reasons is we have not had coherent national federal guidance. We've had a series of responses by the states that have run the gamut from the very well organized and very effective to the dismally failing. So that's one of the problems we've had,
and that's going to continue to go on. And this is where, when you say that there's a lot of this that is political, because I mean the federal government is basically, we're sending this out to to every state and 6 or 7 other municipalities. We're sending them out, and basically what they're doing is they're handling this as an issue, and they're handling it to governors. And Brent Hamachek, let me ask you, we live in a state, and many people listening to this program this evening live in states where there are Democratic governors. This could be a ticking time bomb for Democratic governors that have to decide within their state who's going to be covered and who's not going to be covered, because many of their core constituencies are going to be at odds with each other.
Right.
That's my question to you. Unfortunately, I asked a very good question when we're going to the break. So you've heard the discussion. When we come back, you got 3 minutes to think about it, and we'll hear from everybody else. I'm Bruce DuMont, 1-800-723-8229, from coast to coast and border to border. How do you feel about the priorities set at the moment for the distribution of the vaccine? And are you willing to take it? 1-800-723-8289. I'm Bruce DuMont. Bruce DuMont back on Beyond the Beltway, wherever you're listening from coast to coast and border to border. Nice to have you with us. If you're listening or you're watching this program on Facebook or on YouTube, as we go to our breaks each week, we show some beautiful shots from the locations of our affiliates from coast to coast. And if you can ever identify what they are, send me a little note, or just go on Facebook and send me a message post as to whether or not you can identify where these some of these great, beautiful locations are. I mean, there's no reward in it. You have to do this just because it's something to do, but something to do. Let's take a moment, something that we do here every week. We let each of our guests describe and introduce themselves, and I'm going to begin with David Kohn, because in my introduction to you, I totally screwed up where you used to work. So I'm going to let you correct the record and tell us a little bit more about you, David.
Well, thanks, Bruce, and good evening, everyone. Great to be part of tonight's discussion. I'm a Chicago area kid and a veteran of media and government work in Illinois. I worked for many years for a member of Congress from Illinois, John Porter, represented the 10th District, big district immediately north of the city. Was with him for about 15 years. I subsequently was director of communications for Illinois Lieutenant Governor Corinne Wood. So worked for a couple of moderate Republicans. They're largely extinct now. You can occasionally see them on display in museums, but other than that, John Kasich on CNN, who some of the Democratic Party would argue perhaps isn't so moderate, but anyways, so that was my political background. But I was a radio talk show host and a reporter, and worked at the Union League Club for 16 years.
And let's go to Brent Hamachek, who will give us a brief description of your background.
So, by the way, first of all, Merry Christmas to all your listeners.
Merry Christmas to you.
And viewers. But I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'm the director of content and operations for Human Events News. I work with Jeff Webb, who is the founder of Varsity Brands and is now stepping into the world of political policy and ideas. So I get to work with him. I've had the great privilege to do a lot of work in the past with Charlie Kirk, who I think is the brightest and boldest and bravest voice in American politics today. So I'm just a lucky guy here.
Right, and also we should mention that Charlie Kirk was a frequent guest on Beyond the Beltway many years ago when he was, I think, still in high school, and he now is a talk show host in addition to the other things that he's doing for Turning Point USA. But he's on in the afternoons on WIND in Chicago, and again on the Salem Radio Network. Mays Jackson, you have a distinguished record, and I want you to tell everybody about it and what you're up to.
You know what? I'll start with I'll keep it simple. I am the host of the Mays Jackson Show on the What's in It for the Black People Media Network. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I am the host of the Mays Jackson Show on the What's in It for the Black People Media Network, where we have about 12 hours of programming every day, focused on the black, the whole black lifestyle. You can catch me every day, Monday through Friday, 6 to 9 on 1570 AM, on Facebook Live, on YouTube as well. I'm also in my part-time a lobbyist as well.
Okay. One other thing that you mentioned in the early part of the broadcast, Mays, was the fact that many in the African American community are not happy with what Joe Biden has done thus far in making appointments of some high visibility. Um, Tell us more about what your concern is, and does having a vice president of the United States soften any criticism that you might have that the people who have been appointed thus far, they're not getting the top jobs, they're getting maybe middle range cabinet positions?
Yes. So let me say, first of all, I would consider myself what you call a disgruntled Democrat. I am frustrated at the fact that the Democratic Party has taken the Black community and our overwhelming support of them for years for granted, and it is very rarely translates into economic policy. We saw that Joe Biden was on his deathbed politically and was saved by what happened by the Black turnout in South Carolina, and then went on to see the Black community come back and sweep him through a primary that then helped him go on to become the president. In our community right now, there is really a debate. While oftentimes people, white people, like to talk about people of color and talk about this being a historic moment, we are still trying to figure out to navigate the first South Asian woman versus the first Black woman being president, that vice president. That stated, we do not, a lot of people that I see, we saw Ice Cube demand a conversation before the president was elected. And what we saw was that Joe Biden said, wait until after the election. We see the appointments that Joe Biden is now making, and none of those spots seem to be spots of significant budget or staff that Black people are being appointed to. And considering how much we did to get him elected to president, to the victor goes the spoils. And quite frankly, we don't see the return on investment. None of the big spots that he's giving out right now have gone to Black people. I think we're holding out for now agriculture or Jay Johnson, Department of Defense.
Brett, I want to get to you in response to that. Donald Trump did better with minority voters, both Black voters and Latino voters, than anyone in recent history. My question to you is, without Donald Trump, the man out there, does the Republican Party have an opportunity, and if so, how would they manifest an ongoing involvement trying to continue to expand their Republican base with more minority voters? Is it possible without Trump or, himself?
So that's a terrific question. Here's the short answer to what is really a very long answer. Let me tell you what we're going to be working on in our organizations over the next couple of years. We are going to be working on taking the ideas, the policy ideas behind the Trump presidency. And we are, if you will, we're going to sort of boil them off so that everything's gone except the bone. And what we're going to try to do is take those policies and make them understandable to people and make them do it in a way that they're able to communicate them, and do it in a way that they're able to internalize them instead of memorize them, so that as people, regardless of their color or their education or any other attribute that makes no difference whatsoever,
Mays Jackson is
hold on to
yeah.
the principles that Trump's been trying to promote, and then we can get those communicated, whether it's inside of a Black community or a suburban woman community or whatever other community.
Okay, before we one second, take a breath. Before we go to David, Mays was shaking his head both yes and no as you were speaking, so I want to give him the opportunity to respond first, and then we're going to go to David.
So,
Mays.
I think Brent, in his conversation, kind of reflects the problem that the Republican Party has, which is they want to remove the fact that they want to take out color, they want to take out race, they want to take out all of the factors that really make their message not resonate in our community. Oftentimes what we find with the Republican Party, and this is really why they have such a challenge breaking through, is because it usually winds up being a bunch of white men deciding what they believe is best for Black people, instead of meaningfully engaging and going into the community and saying, and going into a Black community and saying, hey, how do we connect with you authentically? Oftentimes what we find is that there's not a belief that they can really convert Black voters, so they make nominal efforts, spend small amounts of money. The groups that they work with. Yes.
Mays, let me ask you this question. Were you pleased with the number of African American Republicans who won congressional seats? Did that surprise you? I am
pleased. Let me say this. I am pleased that there is an alternative and that Democrats can see that if they don't tune up their message, that they have the potential to lose. I hate the fact that all Black folks, for the most part, have been pigeonholed to one side of the boat, which leaves us without the ability to negotiate what is in our best interest. So I think that was a good thing that happened. I look forward to seeing more debate and more discussion.
Dave, Kohn, go ahead to you.
Well, first of all, let me just add to what Mays just said, that I think the Republican and the Democratic parties have equally been guilty of failing to, I think the word that's been missing in this conversation is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what the Black experience, what the experience of, if you'll forgive the phrase, the community of the people of color in this country has been. To deny that history and to try and talk about meaningful policy responses is absolutely absurd. And so we have to move beyond that. We have to acknowledge the totality of what has led us to this point in history if we're going to try and make meaningful reform. As far as the Republican Party is concerned, it's gut check time. It's time to decide whether it is truly the party of Lincoln and stands for these pillars of fiscal restraint and sobriety, strong national defense, the rule of law, or whether it's going to be a cult of fealty to Donald Trump.
But again, the reason that Donald Trump did so well is Donald Trump did touch a nerve, whether it was criminal justice reform or other things, or just his bombastic personality. I mean, he comes across like a star of some kind, and that had some of the appeal, did it not, Mays?
Yes,
I mean,
Bruce,
he was a showman.
You got to recognize that Donald Trump represents an alpha male and has a long-standing history in the Black community, particularly in the hip-hop community. He's been mentioned in music, etc., and he was a source of admiration years and years ago. And so I think he represents, quite often in our community, the people that maybe felt that they were called the deplorables on the white side, Donald Trump probably resonated with those people, the equivalent on the other side of the Black community. Not that anybody was the
It'll be tough for Mike Pence to pull that off. I'm Bruce DuMont, back shortly from Chicago. If they do not have a vaccination for the vaccine.
So full disclosure, my son is going back to school and he does not have a vaccine. I think that, yes, I don't believe that kids should be forced. I think until we know fully how this vaccine is going to work and it goes through the full regimen, I'm just nervous about forcing. I would rather take my chance with the COVID, knowing that my child can recover, than having some vaccine that we don't know what's going to happen to him.
Do you understand why many of the parents who are in those classrooms with your son may not want to send their children back? Because they want to do, at least in their mind, the responsible thing is to take the vaccine, and they don't want your son to be affected, but they don't want to be affected by your son potentially.
I completely understand. I think that right now what we're seeing is that the people the group that is sending their kids back are the people that are saying that they are willing to take the chance and willing to send their kids. So I think it's kind of reversed right now.
How widespread is the anti-vaccination movement within the Black community?
I don't even want to speak too much on that. I know that Minister Farrakhan had connected with some of the Kennedys and talked about the anti-vaccination. I don't think it's an anti-vaccination move. I think movement in our community, as much as it is, no one trusts the speed through which this vaccine came about and would like to see somebody else go first and make sure they don't grow a third ear or a third eyeball before we take it. It is not that we're not ever going to take it, but we want to see how it unfolds first.
Brent Hamachek, who needs to prove to the public, not only the African American public, but to the broader public, because there are some, non-blacks who have fear of vaccination as well. My question to you is, all former presidents, with the exception of Jimmy Carter, have said they're going to take it. President Trump has said he's going to take it. Joe Biden has said he's going to take it. Is it going to take more than just ex-presidents to send this message? And is that going to be enough to get culturally to the people that need to get it?
Look, the fact that Clinton, Bush, Obama are going to take it, that's actually probably a good reason not to. But the idea that people are concerned about the vaccine, because none of those three are role models, the idea that people are concerned about the vaccine is perfectly valid. Forget politics for a minute on a show that's all about politics. We have never before had a successful vaccine for a coronavirus strain. Now we have one that's developed in a handful of months. Now, whether you're a supporter of Donald Trump's policies like I am, or a supporter of Biden's soon-to-be policies like the other two gentlemen, doesn't really matter. There's a very good reason to be skeptical, a healthy bit of skepticism about this vaccine. By the way, as to whether or not kids should be back in school, they should be back in school now. They never should have left. The fact that
with
we have
a vaccination,
out of school,
with a vaccination, though. I mean, that's going to be the next battle. Is that are parents going to send their children back with a vaccination, or how widespread is this reservation? I mean, Mays has talked about it within the black community, but it probably exists in certain sectors of the white community. And I want to get David Cohn's reaction to that. David, first of all, do you give the administration credit for the speed with which they've been able to pull this off medically?
I don't give the administration. I give the scientific community and the dedicated researchers that have spent countless thousands of hours working on it credit for coming up to where we are now. I also want to agree with Brent and with Mays. I don't think there's anything wrong with healthy skepticism about the safety or efficacy of something that the government and scientists are saying, go ahead and inject this into your bodies. That's reasonable. What's not reasonable is the sort of anti-science platform that this administration has pursued that I think undergirds some of the skepticism that we've seen. But I had a question that
David, let me ask you this. What evidence do you have that they've acted in an anti-science way when the president has used the bully pulpit to talk about the speed with which he wants the FDA to move some of these trials forward, as well as the incentives he has provided to some of the companies? What is it about the administration, the way when they've dealt with the scientists? It's the scientists, David. It's the scientists that told us once in the past, don't wear a mask. And then it was wear a mask. I mean, that was Dr. Birx. I mean, that was Anthony Fauci. I mean, there's been confusion at the federal level about what to do. So,
look, Bruce,
anyone who looks at that, factually can say, wait a minute, who do I believe here?
Okay, look,
we've got 10 seconds, Dave. Go.
If I could respond, with all due respect, there is a huge difference between the efficacy and public policy about wearing or not wearing a mask and developing a vaccine that is injected into the human body. The protocols regarding the latter are so much further along and further understood and more well developed over decades and decades of human experience than the masking issue. So let's not confuse.
On that note, Dave, we have to say farewell to you and to Brent and to Mays. Again, this is an issue we'll be talking about for, I think, quite some time on Beyond the Beltway. Randall Betcher and Connor McKnight help make this program possible. I'm Bruce DuMont. Good night from Chicago.
What is hope? Hope to me was just that he would get to come home. I had no idea how hard it would be once he got back.
I wish she'd stop drinking so much. She thinks it's helping, but it's not. I hope she sees that soon.
I act like I don't care if he comes to my games, but I hope he does.
I used to hope he'd find happiness again. Now I hope our marriage makes it.
I hope Grandpa will